Southern Ontario Sports Podcast. You are listening to the SOS Podcast, week of Monday, January 5th, 2015. Happy New Year to everybody. Happy New Year, Steve. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well over here. It's a little colder. It signifies the real start of winter, but can't complain. 2014 is going to hope to be even better.
Yeah, for sure. Winter has definitely arrived in the capital region as well. We're freezing up here too. But I guess that's the start of 2015 for us. But before we get ahead, we didn't really get to close out 2014. So why don't we take a moment to wrap up 2014 quickly. I think before we get too far, we'd like to congratulate World Junior Team Canada on ice performance, taking gold medal just a couple days ago. Really a team that couldn't be stopped. Not many flaws out there, and certainly even when the Russians looked to have a little bit against them, Team Canada was in control.
Yeah, a pretty dominant team. They didn't trail the entire tournament, and even that last little bit of adversity against Russia, again, they still had that one goal lead, and it wasn't like previous years where you kind of thought that next goal is coming right away, but they showed that top through bottom, they were the best team.
Yeah, and parting thought here on the Team Canada lineup, Connor McDavid, that guy is fast. Like, wow, he picks up the puck and decides to throw it in gear. He is untouchable, at least with his peers. So interesting to see where he goes in the draft coming up this offseason.
Yeah, definitely rare to see someone who skates faster with the puck than without it, but he definitely seems to be one of those guys.
And I think he might have shoot in first overall, special with the rival performance from his U.S. counterpart Eichel, but we'll see how that goes. One other just quick thought here before we wrap up for 2014. Steve and I both wanted to have kind of a highlight of the year sports-wise. We'll share them with you here. Steve, why don't you take it away? I'll give you the floor first.
For mine, I think I'll go back to late June. You have Kings and Rangers, and it's hard to top a Stanley Cup winning overtime goal. So I'll go back to Alec Martinez coming off already an overtime goal to get the Kings to the finals. Puts another one home in double OT. Kings get their second cup, and just a great moment between the atmosphere, it being on home ice, and it bringing home the cup. Just truly a great moment.
Yeah, it was a great moment, and definitely in the heat of the moment, it was a spectacular finish. I don't know if the Kings' chances at winning that Stanley Cup were ever in doubt after getting through the Blackhawks the prior round, but that moment truly was a special one. Totally agree with you there. As for mine, I'm going back to the World Cup this past year. Brazil, Germany. Germany strolls in and pumps them 7-1. Just a shocker of the year pretty well, or a shocker of maybe even decades. Brazil hadn't lost in a meaningful match since 1975, so over 30 years ago. It's been over almost 100 years since they lost by 6 goals. Or more. This all happened this past summer, so for me that was the one moment this year that captured my attention.
Yeah, definitely a real shocker. I don't think anyone thought it was fixed because it was just too extreme. Just even for the non-soccer fans seeing that, they knew that this was quite a beatdown of epic proportions.
And so those are our thoughts, I guess, for 2014. So a year in the books, and of course was the inaugural year for the SOS podcast, so I think it'll always have a special place, of course, on the show. So long, 2014. All right, well, with the calendar turning to 2015, the MLB Hall of Fame induction took place this past week. We'll take a quick moment here just to recap the players. Randy Johnson, Pedro Martinez, John Smoltz, Craig Biggio inducted as part of the 2014 class. All 4 of these guys, with the exception of Biggio, I should say, are first ballot Hall of Famers. Biggio on his 3rd ballot. Johnson, probably the most dominant of the group with 5 Cy Youngs, 21 years playing experience. He's the 5th most wins as a left-hander with 303, and 2nd all-time in strikeouts. He's the most memorable of this class for me personally. He was a fastballer that threw hard, had some slider action that he'd pull out as well. Just a big guy, dominant-looking guy, badass mullet out there. Don't know what else to say about Randy Johnson, but heck of a player there. Steve, your thoughts on this group? Anybody in particular like to note?
I mean, they're all great players. Obviously, you got to feel for Craig Biggio coming up 2 votes short last year of getting into the Hall, and this year he's able to make it, so I'm sure that felt great for him. But for me, if it's one of the 4, it's Pedro Martinez. Never really the biggest guy, but when he was out there, he dominated. When he hit you with an intent and a purpose, and I'm pretty sure he's the only person in the Hall of Fame to throw down with an 80-year-old man in games, so for that. Lots of respect for Pedro Martinez.
Just one of his many memorable video clips. That was a great one. And we should give a slight nod to John Schmaltz, also a great pitcher, part of that historic Braves pitching staff of the early mid-'90s, along with Maddox and Glavine, a feared force on the mound as well. So congrats to each of those guys on their induction, and I don't think there was any mistakes here on the ballot this year. Tough to argue with any of those names. Steve, are you the same mind?
Yeah, I don't think anyone's going to say any of those guys aren't worthy. Some people might argue that Jeff Bagwell or Piazza should join them, but they've still got a few years to get their names in there.
Exactly, and I think you can't necessarily argue with the names they chose. Maybe you have a few arguments for those they didn't choose, but nothing wrong here. And we'll see for some of these other guys coming up where they land in the future if they can get in.
Welcome to the National Hockey League.
Then you have the Toronto Maple Leafs,
The home ice advantage is actually a disadvantage.
Ottawa Senators.
If I was an Ottawa Senators fan,
Kessel had a couple goals.
a late goal by Ryan off a nice pass from Carlson.
Gotta love the Habs.
Suarez looking to be a dominant player again.
All right, on to the NHL. We'll take our first big bite here in 2015, get into things. Toronto Maple Leafs, Randy Carlyle has been fired. Just a couple of days ago, this news hit. Of course, this is a big move in Leaf Nation, coming right after, well, not right after, a day or two later after the 5-1 loss to Winnipeg on Saturday night. I personally didn't get to see that game, but the highlights looked rather terrible for the boys in blue, and the writing seemed to be on the wall at that point. Steve, your thoughts on Carlisle?
Yeah, that Winnipeg game was not the best showing for the Leafs. Multiple stretches of multiple minutes of being hemmed in their own zone. And with Winnipeg, while they're definitely not a bad team with so many injuries on the back end, you like to at least see the Leafs compete with some of the time on attack and having the puck in their zone. But it was just not happening at all. For the Leafs, even when they were winning, they had that 9-1-1 stretch. The underlying numbers showed that it was not sustainable. And lo and behold, they go out west, they lose 5-7, only get 4 points on the road trip. And I think everyone sort of knew it was coming. It was just a matter of when, not if. And eventually it was time for Randy Carlyle to go.
Yeah, and I think you've alluded to it there, the underlying numbers, and just looking at things from a shots on goal basic perspective here. They're currently 29th in the league, just over 34 shots a night. And those numbers had not seemed to dip or change much over this season or even last season. With the way Carlisle has approached that team. If you're looking for other maybe disconnects within the organization, he was a bit resistant to playing the fourth line, which has kind of been a trademark of his, even though the current administration sort of revamped the way the team looked and gave him some other options on the fourth line for productive hockey. But overall, they weren't getting the job done, and the team is mediocre with long stretches of losses countered by long stretches of wins, and that's not much better than a 500 record, which I think they're trying to change here in Toronto.
Yeah, I think it is uncommon to have a coach fired when your team is still in playoff position, but again, all things considered, I think everyone sort of knew this was coming, especially with the assistants getting fired in the offseason, and you have to wonder if maybe playing guys like Trevor Smith, who is not a bad player by any means, serviceable depth player, but he's not really, his potential to become a greater player, move out the lineup isn't really there anymore. And you got to wonder if management maybe wanted Carlisle to play some of the younger guys more, and if that had any effect into it as well.
Yeah, that's it, and it's a long-term look. So with that in mind and looking a bit forward here, the Leafs sort of promote Peter Horacek and Steve Spott to step in and run the team. Exactly how that breaks down, we will find out. A little bit of talk going around following Phil Kessel and the interview where he sort of went off on a reporter, basically getting called out, in terms of his maturity, his coachability, his value to the team. Maybe a name like Phaneuf comes up, who's been there, part of that core group for 4 or 5 years now, and really no success amongst them. Steve, do you think there's changes with Carlisle going? Is there any chance that Kessel or Phaneuf, do they finally show up on the line here?
I definitely think there will be changes in terms of player personnel. I don't think they'll happen immediately. I think you're going to want to see Shanahan see how these guys do away from Carlisle for a little bit to get a true read on them. On the other hand, though, I do think the hate on Kessel is pretty stupid. It's not his fault. He's got no one to play with. That goes back to Nonis and the management. He doesn't control roster assembly. And he's consistently one of the best goal scorers and point getters in the entire league year in, year out. I really don't think that you can pin it on him. I mean, it's not much to say. It's just really, how can you blame the one guy who produces on the team?
Yeah, and that is what the argument boils down to in the end. And it actually is contract value for what his production is actually quite competitive at this point. Maybe it was a few years ago it looked a little different, but I think at this stage, with the money he's making for what he is producing on the ice, it would be more effective to maybe add another piece to assist him rather than move him out to try and improve. But I guess those are the questions front office will be looking at. And one of the other questions they'll be looking at is what do they do long term in the role of coach for the team. This offseason, things could get interesting. Names that come up as possible options, depending who's available. Mike Babcock of the Red Wings, Todd McClellan of the San Jose Sharks, Ken Hitchcock, St. Louis Blues, Dave Tippett even of the Arizona Coyotes. So there's some quality names available there. Definitely some names that can help generate some structure, defensive accountability within that locker room. I think something that's really hasn't been there for the past few seasons. If you have a look at the goals against and shots against on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think another name to consider might be Pete DeBoer, former New Jersey and Kitchener Rangers coach, and also not to rule out Peter Horachek. He was interim coach last year with Florida. I don't think it's unforeseen that he could do a great job behind the bench and maybe earn that title going forward, but I do think if Babcock wants to come here, the Leafs will give him a blank check and tell him to fill out the rest.
Yeah, no doubt there. I think I would guess very strongly that the Leafs want to make a big move with this position and opportunity. While Horachek may very well be well qualified and familiar with the team, I don't think he has the same name value, and I think the Leafs might go for something real big like that. And the name that fits the bill there is Mike Babcock. Some of those other guys mentioned earlier would certainly suit the bill as well. But I think they make a big move. I think they wait till the offseason and try and land one of these guys.
There's no salary cap on coaches. MLS used to just sign them all.
Well, never say never, right?
Hey.
Okay, well, with that, we'll jump over to the Ottawa Senators. Story developed a little while ago, late into 2014, just after we went off the air for the year. But of course, the Senators fired Coach Paul McLean and promoted Dave Cameron, who had been with the team since 2001, into the position of head coach. He does have a fair amount of experience coaching with Mississauga St. Michael's Majors, as well as at the World Junior level. He's also spent some time in Binghamton of the Senators' AHL affiliate. So he definitely comes with a nice little resume. Steve, I'll give you the floor first here on this one. Senators fire McLean. What do you think?
Again, I don't think anyone thought he was going to be there for too long into the future, but at the same time, the timing probably wasn't when everyone expected it. I think, again, with management, they want to see some of the younger guys playing more, not necessarily Legwand playing 15 minutes and more of Hoffman and Zibanejad getting that ice time. And at the same time, just Senators were in a big rut. They needed something to change it up, and I guess they weren't willing or weren't able to make a player personnel decision that would do that, so they figured this was the way to go.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't really say you're surprised by the firing. Were the numbers great? No. Were they anything to stand up for? Certainly not. So it's not surprising. I was a little put off, I guess, if you will, by the timing of it. In my opinion, happening relatively early in the season. I don't know what you try and prove, firing a coach 20-odd games into it. What did you not know at the off season in July and August that you knew 25 games into it? It's not like Coach McLean hadn't been around for a while. It kind of seemed like a desperate move in that sense, but again, the numbers weren't great, so I won't argue too much further. In saying that, they move forward with Dave Cameron. I guess that's the logical step. I won't criticize that. I think Cameron's got a better shot of finishing off the year and moving forward maybe than a Horachek might in Toronto. I don't know if Ottawa's necessarily as dead set on having a big move in the offseason, but those same names would come up for Ottawa as well. It would be interesting to see. Steve, do you think they stick with Cameron moving forward for the long run, or do they take a stab in this offseason?
I definitely do think there's a better likelihood of him staying around than Horacek as the Leafs interim going forward into next year. But that being said, especially with Brian Murray's health, I wouldn't be completely surprised if he steps down and Ottawa just does a complete resetting of their front office personnel.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I don't think that can be doubted at all. At some point, obviously, Brian Murray, health issues being the concern here, will have to step aside. Not that he's not necessarily doing a good job, though that's another topic of discussion. But if he moves aside, what happens to that front office, and maybe Dave Cameron sees the end of his tenure as a result of that. And in saying that, I think he's got the team playing okay right now, maybe even a touch better than they were under Coach McLean. They're 4-3-3 in the last 10. A couple of those games probably should have ended a little more favorably for them. Most recently, this game against Philly. I think Cowan and Carlson seem to be playing a little bit steadier on the ice, as well as Ceci. So I'm not sure if Coach Cameron is having this effect entirely, or if maybe the team's just got a bit of a feel right now. But I like where they're going, I guess, for a team that sits in 9th, 10th, or 11th on any day of the season.
This is the NFL.
The hometown Bills.
I think Buffalo's going to keep it close. The home crowd will be with them. It'll give them some more energy.
308 yards, a touchdown.
I don't think anyone was predicting the Bills to win.
New England Patriots looking good out there.
No one was going to stop Tom Brady.
New Orleans wins in OT.
San Francisco.
Cleveland pulls out a win. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the NFL. We've got 4 playoff games this weekend featuring Denver, Indianapolis, New England, Baltimore, Seattle, Carolina, Green Bay, Dallas. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about each of these, maybe a quick point or two on each. So why don't we lead off here with Denver, Indianapolis. Kind of the storyline coming into this one is Peyton Manning sort of slowed down over the last 5-6 games of the season as Denver kind of switched to a run-dominant offense. The other question of the day, what's Andrew Luck going to bring to the table? He may have slowed down a bit towards the end of the season as well, but looking to take that next step. So, Steve, your thoughts on the quarterbacks for both teams?
Yeah, obviously you've got 2 elite quarterbacks, one towards the end of his career, one just starting out. It should be a shootout. I think you're going to see a lot of points scored in this one. That being said, though, Peyton is much more experienced in this. Luck is just coming off his second ever postseason win, and I think Peyton, after the way last season ended, I think there's no chance he doesn't get back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I am taking the Broncos, and actually, I think you can almost take Peyton out of this conversation. I think the Broncos are going to win this. A more developed running game and a much stronger defense. They've got a pass rush that can get to Andrew Luck. The Colts are kind of a little thin when it comes to the run game, as well as their general defensive presence. And I think for those 2 reasons, the Broncos do come out on top on this one. Also playing at home, also have Peyton Manning, who at least won't make poor decisions. Maybe his arm strength is lacking. Maybe there are some issues. Who knows? But I still find it hard to say that Peyton Manning costs the Broncos this game. And when you talk about, in my opinion, a better defense and certainly a better running game, I think the Broncos come away with this one.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I just don't see Indianapolis having the type of stout D to really shut down Peyton enough to give themselves a chance to win this game.
All right, so we're both on the Broncos bandwagon there, shifting over in the AFC to Gillette Stadium in Foxborough. The New England Patriots taking on Baltimore. This, in my opinion, might be Baltimore that is representing the road team with the best chance to win this weekend. The road teams across the board look pretty rough in my opinion, but I think Baltimore's got the best chance to roll in New England and get an upset. Steve, what do you think, New England, Baltimore?
Again, another great matchup. Baltimore, I do like their chances in this. Joe Flacco just seems to win. Doesn't necessarily have the best stats, but when it comes to the playoffs, he just gets the job done. Baltimore's defense is always vaunted, and as good as Tom Brady is, I really don't know if they'll be able to take this one out over Baltimore.
Yeah, and I think the pass rush for the Ravens, much like the Broncos I alluded to earlier, I think that's going to be a big difference in this game. Tom Brady, if there's ever times where he's less reliable and less able to win, it is those occasions where there's a developed pass rush coming at him, and I think Baltimore has the ability to do that. On the offensive side of Baltimore, You're looking at Joe Flacco as a pretty proven playoff contributor for the Ravens. He's not going to, again, much like my comments about Peyton, he's not going to lose them the game. For the sake of my pick here, he has enough to win them the game. That's probably where Brady has the advantage, is if you get to a 30 plus scoring game for either side. We like Brady to find the end zone a little bit more than Flacco. But barring a high-scoring affair, I think Baltimore's got a good chance here, and they'd be my pick as well. All right, looking at Seattle, Carolina over in the NFC. To me, this is a complete lock from the Seattle Seahawks perspective. They've got home field advantage, which has pretty well been a death sentence for anybody showing up in their stadium. The defense has really come together over the last 6-7 games. The team as a whole playing much better. Russell Wilson, almost 1,000 yards rushing on the year, just adding an X factor aside from his arm, which he's also able to let loose once in a while. I don't see a scenario which Carolina does win this football game. Steve, do you have a different thought on that?
I do, actually. The last 3 matchup for these teams all been decided by less than a touchdown. Carolina's got a great defense just as well. I think having a mobile quarterback like Cam Newton, who looked pretty good last week coming off that car accident, so I think he's healthy enough. I like their chances. I like their kicker, Graham Gano. I think he's clutch enough where if they need a big field goal, he'll hit it even in Seattle. And I think this game's going to be a lot closer than most people envision.
Well, I'll give you credit. You make a nice argument there, Steve. It's not going to sway me. Maybe this game will be a little bit closer than I'm expecting, and I'll have another game of interest to watch, so no complaints there.
So long as it's a little bit better than the Cardinals-Panthers first playoff game, I think everyone's going to be okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That one. Yeah. Stinker there. And then to finish off the playoff weekend, Dallas visiting Lambeau Field to play the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay absolutely solid at home. Dallas, on the other hand, absolutely solid on the road, going a perfect 8-0 on the season when visiting the other team. I think I'm still leaning towards Green Bay. I like the feel-good story in Tony Romo trying to get something done here, but Aaron Rodgers is playing at an MVP level this year. He has more offensive weapons than I think even Dallas does, and that's saying something. I think you got to give him the advantage playing in Lambeau at home. The Packers, snow, cold, probably going to be a factor. Not going to be pretty for Tony Romo, and I think that's just enough to have Dallas and Tony Romo end another disappointing year.
Yeah, I think similar to the Denver-Indianapolis matchup, just Dallas does not have enough of a stout defense to shut down Aaron Rodgers, especially in Green Bay. I think he's playing too well right now. Like you said, too many options between Eddie Lacy or Cobb or Jordy Nelson or even Rodgers at tight end. There's just so many guys he can give it to that Dallas, even though it seemed like destiny last week that they're going to win, whether there's penalties or no penalties on the play, I think their season does come to an end this coming week at Green Bay.
Yeah, and you almost have to feel bad for Tony Romo. It seems like every year, he's got something going, and then just he runs into a really tough opponent or something. And I think Green Bay is just that kind of opponent. Just going to be too much for that team to overcome, and not necessarily even going to be Romo's fault. But Green Bay is a good football team. So we'll see if the Packers can finish off the Dallas Cowboys and head on to the NFC Championship. All right, Steve, let's talk a little NBA. Toronto Raptors, while we've been off the air for a couple weeks, have not changed much. They are now officially third in the conference, a couple games back of first place Atlanta. Still running away with the division, comfortably ahead of Brooklyn by 8 games at this point in the season. When you add to the mix their next 4 matchups to start a homestand are Charlotte, Boston, Detroit, Philadelphia. 4 very winnable games. Have the Raptors looking pretty good at what will be the 38-game mark on the schedule, so just under the halfway point. They'll eventually finish the homestand, their second last game at home against Atlanta, so a bit of a test there. But this team is in great shape heading into the midpoint of the season. Your thoughts here on the Raptors?
Yeah, I think most people expected them to be in the top 3 at this time of the year, and especially after the DeRozan injury, the way they've been able to stay afloat. Again, most people probably not too happy with how that road trip ended out west, but long western trip, again, missing DeRozan, I think it's to be expected that you're going to have a couple of games of letdown. You'd like to see the defense be a little bit better, but in the Eastern Conference for now, I think they're going to get by with it. Like you said, the upcoming games look pretty winnable. I wouldn't look past Detroit. They're playing a lot better now since they waived Josh Smith and they've got a pretty good front court. So I think that's a game that the Raptors might be a bit of a trap one to look out for that. But overall, again, I do see them going forward and probably easily setting a franchise record for most wins in a season.
All right, and I like where you're going with that. Nice optimistic prediction to start 2015. I think we've said it here a few times now on the show when we're talking about the Raptors. No real reason to be worried or fearful. I think they keep this push on. Again, they've earned themselves a nice cushion here for the backstretch if injuries do become a problem or that sort of thing, or they develop a losing streak here and there. I think they've played well enough in the first half that they can get by that. Certainly make the playoffs, and with a little bit of luck, not much though, they'll definitely get a top 4 seed in the conference and have home court advantage, at least for the first round, if not further. And we will wrap up the show here with our first pick and predict of 2015. So just to demonstrate some accountability here, we're going to quickly go through the results of our last episode, which was 2014. We'll wipe the slate clean, but I had the Thunder beating the Cavs, so I took that one. Steve managed to claw back into it with the Cowboys beating the Eagles late in the season to help secure their playoff berth. And we both were correct with the Habs beating the Kings, finishing 2014 with a 2-1 in record apiece. But as mentioned, we will start fresh in 2015. We'll think of something to put on the line here as the year develops. But without any ado, let's get to pick and predict our first edition of the season. So game 1 of the NFL, we talked a little bit about it earlier. Steve, you were high on Carolina. I was pretty pumped on Seattle. Steve, who are you taking?
Yeah, I'm gonna go through with it and take the Panthers. I like Seattle. I like them, but I think it's time for a new team to come through.
All right. Well, you're allowed to do what you like. I think it's a foolish move. Seattle, in fairness, are 10.5-point favorites, so this might not be the fairest pick and predict of all time, but I'm going Seattle. I don't think Carolina finds a way to cover the 10 points, let alone win on the road. Looking at game number 2 in the NBA, Friday night in Washington, the Chicago Bulls are visiting. Steve, Bulls or Washington?
I like the Bulls right now. They're rolling. They want to show the Wizards, who beat them in the playoffs last year, that they are a team to reckon with this year, and they're going for that top spot in the Eastern Conference. So I'm taking the Bulls on the road.
Yeah, I'm going to side with you on this one. I'm going to go with the Bulls and playing some hot basketball right now. They've got a nice push going, so I'll take the Bulls with you. And our third game of pick and predict this week, the Rangers visiting Los Angeles in a finals rematch.
For this one, I want to pick the Rangers. They've got the memories of losing the Stanley Cup on LA home ice. They're going to want to come in there, have a good effort. They've got Henrik Lundqvist. I think the Kings are just too good, so I'm going to pick the home team in this matchup, so I'm taking the Kings this time.
Yeah, and it looks like I'm following you here again, Steve. I like LA. I like that they're at home, and the travel there for the Rangers cross-continent is not going to assist in anything, so we'll say LA, as the better team, in my opinion, certainly gets this win on home ice. All right, and that will wrap up today's edition of the show. Got our first pick and predict in for 2015. Steve, good to get back on the air. Hope to see you soon. Any highlights for you this week?
A couple big games in the hockey world. Again, you've got the Stanley Cup Finals rematch, and you've got Luongo's return to Florida, and I'm sure everything that goes on with the Leafs the rest of the week and seeing how they respond to everything will be media-worthy, whether it actually is or not.
Yeah, and I think our biggest story of the week to come is Ravens upset New England in New England. That's where I've got my eye this weekend. So we'll see if that turns out correct or not. On that note, Steve, we'll see you later. Everybody listening, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next week.